1975, the second European Championships in Magadino, Switzerland. This historic 8mm film of the 1975 Euros was sent to me by Gunther Schmidt from Germany. Many thanks, Gunther. We raced many races together in the 70s. Remember the first Euros in Modena, Italy, a year before? That was one of the very first permanent tracks in Europe, but in hindsight very primitive. A simple layout, the racers and their families sitting around the track without any protective barriers. And now look, just a year later, a brand new permanent track in Magadino, Switzerland. Perfect asphalt, neatly finished infield, proper driver rostrum, spectators behind fences. What a difference and what a progress in just 1 year. The 1975 Magadino track set the standard for all other permanent RC tracks around Europe. The track was only around for a few years, as it was hampered by frequent floodings, as it was located in a valley surrounded by steep hills. To be honest, I don't have a great memory of this race, so I must do this story off the top of my head. Watching the video, it slowly started dawning on me again, bit by bit. Luckily, Ernesto Camponovo, yes, Mr. Lostalo, sent me some black and white pictures and, very importantly, the results of the Formula race and the prototype race. In the early days, we raced Formula on Saturday and prototype on Sunday. Most racers used the same chassis and just swapped the bodies. Franco Sabatini, the 1974 Euro champ, had established the Italian SG brand with a strong team of mainly Italian racers. The other major European brand in the early days of RC racing was PB of Keith Plested from Britain. He also had built a team with RRC racers mainly from Britain. There were some associate cars, a US brand. Gunther Schmidt was the importer for that brand for the German-speaking countries. I believe Dave and Debbie Preston were racing the associated cars, and perhaps also Phil Booth. And then there were the privateers like me, who built their own chassis from scratch, or using parts like wheels and gears from any of these brands. I had been building my own chassis since day one back in 1973, and was getting better and better. This Euros was my breakthrough, I guess, making it to both the Formula and the prototype final. On the engine front, it was very much between the Italian Super Tigre brand of Garofoli, Sabatini's partner in SG, and the American K and B engines. Dutchman Ronnie Tunn was the outlier using the Australian Taipan engine, as he also was with his innovative scratch-built independent suspension chassis. 1975 was the last year for Ronnie to run his own chassis, as he was offered a works driver deal by Franco Sabatini in 1976. I have seen many familiar faces in the paddock area but don't remember all the names. In the comments section below this video I will post screenshots. This is a very rare piece of footage, showing Ronnie Tunn's unique independent suspension chassis, fitted with an Australian-made Taipan engine, I believe. It looks very much like the engine was laid down and the muffler pointing towards the rear. The car with the number 37 on the wing looks like one of Dave Preston's creations with adjustable camber. This is Team UK with, at the far right, Keith Plested with son Mark next to him, and then Dave Preston with daughter Debbie. Then Robin Ellis. Team Germany with Fred Nettenbrecht far left, and next to him Gunther Schmidt and Karl-Heinz Will. The Dutch team with Henk Kroon and Ronnie Tunn at the far left, then Albert Meyer with kids, Frank Kramberg, the Wilson brothers and me standing behind on the right. This must be the Swiss team with Udo Franke, later Jufra Tires, on the left, and single Stig Anderson on the right, a Swede living in Switzerland, I remember. He earned his nickname because he used a single stick transmitter, same as Fred Nettenbrecht, by the way. Here is Gunther Schmidt giving a pep talk to the German team while enjoying their lunch. I believe Jürgen Gunther sitting on the bench behind Big Fred Nettenbrecht. On to the racing. Timekeeping was done with stopwatches and writing down the lap times. You see them sitting in front of the driver's rostrum. The results were then written down on a sheet and pinned on the scoreboard. They did everything manually. Remember, this is 1975. The word computer hadn't even been invented yet, despite the Toyota 2000 banner, suggesting that the year 2000 is just around the corner. We had absolutely no idea what the future had in store for us. Races were started in groups of 6 cars. The flagman counted down from 5. At 3 the cars had to be released, and at 0 the flag was lifted. As these cars had problems to idle for longer than 5 seconds, most cars left well before 0. Yes, we have come a long way looking at today's standards. Everything computerized, MyLabs transponders and instant lap times and results on your iPhone. I let you watch several starts and how the cars perform. But that's how it was back in '75. The SG team were using polyurethane front tires, which gave just the right grip and didn't wear at all. A big advantage for the Italian SG team. I think the rules were changed later that year, stating that the tires had to be black, but these polyurethane tires were more like yellow. So they simply painted these front tires black. I am not even sure where we got our tires from. They surely weren't widely available as they are now, if at all. Many racers cut their own tires from foam rubber sheet material. And as we used the same foam rubber front and rear, these polyurethane front tires were a great solution to keep your car going straight and still corner. You had to have them, or else don't even consider competing. Also note the high rear wings. This was to make the car go straight reasonably well. These pan chassis cars had a straight rear axle, no differential and no means of suspension. These mid-70s pan cars were a real handful to drive. On Saturday we raced the Formula class. In the morning we ran 3 qualifiers, with 6 cars in each heat. With around 50 racers, that still was some 9 groups to go through. Then in the afternoon we ran quarterfinals and semifinals. I don't remember if the top qualifier went straight to the final or had to race in the semifinal. That rule was changed a few years later. The biggest problem in those days was to finish the race without the engine stopping. The main cause was the glow plug. The quality was very poor back then. If you ran the engine a bit too lean, the glow plug would fail and often break and damage the piston. But running lean was often the result of some dirt particles getting into the carburetor. We didn't use filters in the fuel tank yet. Instead, only small filters in the fuel line. Especially the plastic pericarburetors, which were used by most racers, were very sensitive to this problem. Another problem with this carburetor was that it could easily come loose in the crankcase. It wasn't until the late 70s that we started using the much more reliable slide carburetors. I will let you watch some of the Formula class racing and tell a bit more about what model car racing was like in the early days of RC racing. Quite a good crowd had gathered around the new Magadino track to watch the radio-controlled cars screaming by. RC car racing was a novelty only few people had ever seen before. It was only a few years that proportional radio equipment was available. Before that, radio-controlled systems were more or less on-off and not suitable to control a model racing car. The very first international brands on the market were Futaba and Sanwa, both from Japan. The 2 German brands, Multiplex and Robbie, were customized versions of Sanwa and Futaba. I had converted a single stick Robbie transmitter with a pistol grip using a Parma slot race handle. So for me it was pistol for throttle and brake and a stick for left-right. I remember that Dave and Debbie Preston had converted their radios in a similar way. Many racers were using double-stick radios, the standard in model airplanes. Most had steering right and throttle brake left, but some had steering and throttle reversed. There were even some that used just one stick for both steering and throttle brake, like Fred Nettenbrecht and Stig Anderson. The radios were using crystals on the 27 MHz band, the only allowed band for radio control in Europe. The receiver had a crystal that was 455 Hz apart from the radio crystal. There were only 6 official frequencies available. That also explains why we raced with only 6 cars. Each frequency had its own color, and you had to put a little flag on your antenna to indicate what frequency you were on. Racers soon found out that you could fiddle with the frequencies. At first, racers started to reverse the crystals, the radio crystal in the receiver and the receiver crystal in the radio. Later, racers started to have their own set of crystals made on totally different frequencies. Can you imagine the mess? In the late afternoon, it was time for the 30-minute main final to decide the 1975 European Championship in Formula cars. The Italians dominated Formula class once again, with 4 racers in the final: Franco Sabatini, Sergio Veronesi, Collina and Maris. Only 2 from the rest of Europe made the final: Dave Preston from the UK and me, Peter Burvoets from the Netherlands. For me, this was my first major final, with my own scratch-built chassis, with a Vico McCoy .19 engine probably, not sure though, and against 4 Italian factory SG team drivers and one associated team driver. I do not remember how I got in the final. I probably had to go through the semi-final or maybe even the quarter-final. Looking at the number of laps everyone had driven in the final, most of the finalists, apart from Franco Sabatini, must have had their engines quit one or more times. I have stated this before several times. To run 30 minutes without an engine or a radio failure was quite exceptional in these days. I had expected Dutchman Ronnie Ton to be in the final, but much to my surprise, when I saw the results, he wasn't. No doubt he was among the fastest racers in Magadino, but he also must have run into problems. So, after 30 minutes of racing, it was Franco Sabatini first, winning his second Euros title with 102 laps. With SG team racers Colina in second with 95 laps and Mars in third with 92 laps. I finished fourth with 81 laps, Sergio Veronese fifth with 79 laps, and Dave Preston sixth, retiring his car after 19 minutes with just 46 laps. On Sunday, the prototype class was raced, what we now call sports cars. Then all racers in Formula class also raced prototype class, just a matter of putting another body on. Of course, we raced with Lexan bodies already. I remember my very first and only car I ever bought, a Kyosho. It came with a plexiglass body, which shattered in pieces after the first crash, wasting at least 4 hours of hard work to get my first body cut out and painted. Lesson learned. Popular bodies in these early days were the Lola T70, the Elfin, and the Porsche 917-30. Yes, it did rain too in 1974, as you can see. We did not have rain tires yet. The cars were impossible to drive, spinning around at the lightest touch of the throttle. The tires were bad, but these pan cars were also two-wheel drive, and no differential. I don't think there is much difference between the stress levels of racers then and now. RC racing was, and still is, a stressful racing experience. Besides controlling your own car, you also see all your rivals chasing you and trying to pass you. That is one of the few things that hasn't changed in 50 years. In the dry, the prototype cars behaved a lot better, and also better than the Formula cars. Still, we needed a lot of wing to keep the car going straight. What hasn't changed either is the girls in the paddock. This film was shot by Gunther Schmidt, so many of the girls and women, but also racers and pit crew who appear in this video, are unknown to me. Of course, I do remember my racing friends from Germany from back then, Karl-Heinz Will, Jochen Neser, Fred Nettenbrecht and Rainer Dosch. Karl-Heinz and Rainer later became Serpentine drivers in Germany. Most of the racers, especially from Italy, the UK and Germany, still remember though. Like Ted, the rules say, Longshaw. He earned that nickname after becoming the first president of EFRA and later IFMAR, having to intervene in disputes about the technical and racing rules. RC Racing owes Ted Longshaw a lot. I had the honor to work very closely with Ted for many years on setting up the EFRA rulebook in the 70s. I don't remember Ted as a racer, he probably didn't impress me much. Not like Dave Preston, for who he was apparently also pitting in Magadino, besides racing himself. Fred Nettenbrecht, he was quite a character in the German team, an RC racer from day one. We have raced many races together and he appears in many of the 8mm film videos of the 70s and early 80s I have published on Facebook and YouTube. Always a good laugh and always a good beer. I don't know whose car this is, but it is a good example of the scratch-built era. This chassis features a Lexan front chassis and Lexan radio plate. So glad Gunther also shot a typical 70s result page. As you can see, everything handwritten. 1975 technology. Not even a photocopy. This was the original result sheet of the timekeeper. Back to the racing, the main final prototype class. The 6 finalists were Franco Sabatini, Raches from Switzerland, Per Gustafsson from Sweden, Jochen Neser from Germany, Phil Booth from the UK, and me, Peter Bervoets from the Netherlands. The one with the blue t-shirt next to Phil Booth on the rostrum is me. I was so excited to make both finals in the 1975 Euros. Never expected that. But my name was made in RC Racing. 2 SGs, 3 Associateds, and my own scratch-built chassis. I do not remember what chassis I used in Magadino. I'll post a few photos in the comment section of the chassis I think I used in Magadino. It used a profile, the size of which I had jigsawed to mount the front and the rear axles on. The front had semi-suspension, with two brackets mounted with rubber grommets against the chassis sides. The rear held the rear axle and the engine mounts. I think my engine had a tune pipe made by Frank Kromberg. He was an expert fiddling with and soldering brass sheet material. The chassis looked quite neat, at least. The 30-minute final was again testimony of how unreliable the RC cars were back in the mid-70s. In this final, two frontrunners with 105 and 103 laps, the third-place racer 78 and the last three at low 50s. Obviously, 4 of the 6 racers ran into problems during this 30-minute race. The engine cutting was of course the main issue, but also radio interference. At one point in this video there is a car entering the pit lane and then crashing off underneath the rostrum. That was not a rare occasion, it happened all the time. On top of that, you could also easily have issues with servos. For example, it happened quite often that after a crash the nylon gears in the steering servo would break, meaning end of race. And then there was the problem of stripping the gear or breaking the clutch nut. Engines didn't have the extended crankshaft yet for the clutch. Everybody had to cope with these issues, and bad luck could strike anyone, except for Franco Sabatini, it seemed. Just joking. I don't remember exactly how that final went, but I do remember that it was between me and Franco Sabatini till the end. I only remember that I led the final until the last minute and then flamed out. My car had to be returned to the pit lane, restarted, and back on the track to finish just a lap down on Franco Sabatini. So it was first Franco Sabatini, 105 laps, second me with 103 laps, third Raches with 78 laps, fourth Per Gustafsson with 54 laps, fifth Jochen Nazer with 53 laps, and sixth Phil Booth also with 53 laps. I could have won my first European Championship title in 1975 in Magadino, but it wasn't to be. It would have to wait until 1979 in Nuremberg. Franco Sabatini was a great sport and handed the victory flowers to my wife Renee. A picture of that very special moment in my RC racing career is still my Facebook cover image. A great memory, but not knowing what laid ahead for me in RC racing. Many thanks to Gunther Schmidt who sent me the 8mm film and making it part of the RC racing history.